Emotional distance becomes normal, and normal feels right even when it damages you. You meet someone new, you feel something immediately, you call it chemistry, but chemistry is often recognition of something your body has known before, not necessarily something that will build you. Let's make this painfully real. A woman in her early 30s, intelligent, capable, strong in many areas of her life, but her relationships follow a certain pattern. The men she chooses are confident, charismatic, slightly detached, not cruel, not abusive, just emotionally unavailable enough to keep her slightly off balance. The first time she thought it was coincidence, the second time she blamed timing. By the third time, she begins to ask, why do I attract men who are emotionally distant? Welcome to our ego series, where we highlight another important episode on the ego that operates inside each and every single one of us. And what is it that we are highlighting here? First and foremost, we are not giving advice. We are not advisors. We are not giving motivational speak. We are exposing, diagnosing distortions inside of us. A distortion is not a mistake, it is perception bending to protect the self. The ego does not only distort truth in the mind, it distorts attraction in the heart. And today we confront one of the most dangerous distortions in modern relationships. You believe you are unlucky in love. You believe you attract the wrong people. You believe fate keeps sending you the same personality in different bodies. But if we are serious about ego, we must reject comfortable stories. So let's begin clearly. You don't attract toxic people. You choose them. Attraction is not fate, it is familiarity. That sentence will irritate some of you. Of course it will. Because irritation often means a distortion is being touched. If 5 relationships end up in the same emotional pattern, it is not coincidence. If every partner you attract is emotionally distant, chaotic, dominant, unstable, or dependent, that is not destiny. It is repetition. And repetition reveals conditioning. Here is the distortion. The ego confuses familiarity with compatibility. Let that sink in. The ego confuses familiarity with compatibility. You are not drawn to what is healthy. You are drawn to what feels known to you. And what feels known is usually what shaped you earliest. Your nervous system does not prioritize happiness. It prioritizes predictability. Whatever emotional environment you experience repeatedly becomes your baseline. Chaos becomes normal. Silence becomes normal. Inconsistency becomes normal. Emotional distance becomes normal. And normal feels right even when it damages you. You meet someone new, you feel something immediately, you call it chemistry, but chemistry is often recognition of something your body has known before, not necessarily something that will build you. Let's make this painfully real. Imagine a woman in her early 30s, intelligent, capable, strong in many areas of her life, but her relationships follow a certain pattern. The men she chooses are confident, charismatic, slightly detached, not cruel, not abusive, just emotionally unavailable enough to keep her slightly off balance. The first time she thought it was coincidence, the second time she blamed timing. By the third time she begins to ask, why do I attract men who are emotionally distant? Now look closely at how each relationship begins. There is intensity. He is hard to read, not overly expressive. He doesn't reply immediately. He keeps a little distance, and her body reacts. She feels alert, activated, engaged. When he pulls away, she feels anxious. When he returns, she feels relief, and that relief feels powerful. She calls this passion. But what she is feeling is activation of an old emotional blueprint. If affection in her childhood was inconsistent, if love had to be earned, her nervous system wired itself around that unpredictability. Attention was valuable because it was scarce. Consistency was unfamiliar. Now, when she meets a man who is steady, emotionally available, consistent in communication, something feels different. There is no tension, no chase, no dramatic fluctuation. She says, he's nice, but there's no spark. That's why many women, I mean, we've heard this before, are attracted to the bad boy or the rebel type of a person who is not predictable. Imagine, just remember that word, who is not predictable and consistent. This is what keeps that spark going for them. This is what keeps their curiosity going. There is no spark in a relationship where everything is predictable. There is no wound being activated. Peace feels flat when chaos feels familiar. You don't fall in love with what's good for you. You fall in love with what feels familiar to you, and familiarity is not the same as a healthy relationship. Now reverse the lens. Imagine a man now repeatedly chooses partners who need rescuing, emotionally unstable, financially chaotic, constantly overwhelmed. He prides himself on being around these people because it makes him feel strong, reliable, grounded. He says, I don't know why I attract drama, but examine his early conditioning. He earned approval through usefulness. Being needed was how he felt valuable. He became the responsible one, the fixer. Now when he meets a woman who is self-sufficient, emotionally grounded, independent, something feels off. There is nothing to fix, nothing to manage, no crisis to stabilize. He feels unnecessary, irrelevant, invisible. But when he meets someone chaotic, anxious, in need of direction, his identity activates. He feels strong and again useful and relevant. This is what keeps him going in that relationship, and this is what keeps his passion alive. He calls it love, but it is reinforcement. If you feel valuable only when someone needs saving, then you're not choosing love, you're choosing relevance. This is how you feel that your identity is fused into that relevance. This is an ego distortion, and this is how ego distortion operates. The ego does not seek what is best, it seeks what reinforces your identity, even wounded identity. If you believe love must be earned, you will choose people who make you earn it. If you believe intensity equals depth, you will reject stability. And if you equate unpredictability with value, you will chase distance. Chemistry is not destiny. Sometimes it's just a case of history repeating itself. For those of you who end up finding the same kind of people again and again and again, this is where history keeps repeating itself. Now here is where most people stop. They say, that makes sense. And they continue repeating those same mistakes, the same patterns, and in sort of attracting the same toxic people perhaps in those relationships are then repeated. Awareness alone does not break this conditioning, because attraction is not intellectual, it is physiological. Your body has memorized a pattern, and what the body memorizes, it repeats. Some people stay in these dysfunctional relationships not because they are blind, it's because dysfunction gives them meaning. Struggle reinforces that identity. And if you see yourself as loyal because you endure mistreatment, you will endure it again and again. And if you see yourself as strong because you tolerate chaos and that chaos becomes necessary, if you see yourself as deep because your relationships are dramatic, peace will feel shallow. The ego romanticizes suffering when suffering supports the story it tells about yourself. If every relationship feels intense and exhausting, that's not depth, that's conditioning. Now let's confront something even more uncomfortable. Stable love may not feel electric at first. It may feel calm, predictable, boring even perhaps, uneventful. But if your nervous system equates calm with boredom, you will sabotage it. You will overanalyze, you will withdraw, you will create the tension. because it's the tension that makes you feel alive. Think about that for a moment. How many times do we know, or we've heard about, a perfectly stable relationship where there's no drama, it's peace, everything's going well? One spouse will end up going and recklessly damaging that relationship if it's a marriage because they wanted to go and experience an affair. They wanted to go and do something different. And what they've said is they've done it to cure boredom. They were bored in that relationship. And then they go have an affair, and what that does, it sabotages the very peaceful existence they had in that relationship at home with the spouse who was perhaps an anchor of support, a force for stability for them, because the ego craved for something else. It craved for that adventure. And this is how good people end up destroying themselves. This is what we call an ego distortion. Think about that for a moment. So if peace feels boring to you, it's not because the peace is wrong, it's because your nervous system is addicted to activation. Choosing stability over activation is not a preference, it is discipline. Discipline against impulse, discipline against familiarity, discipline against the ego's repetition loop. Now extend this forward. If you marry your pattern, you do not escape it. You institutionalize it. Years will pass, the intensity fades, the instability remains, conversations become transactional, affection becomes conditional, resentment grows quietly, and eventually you say, this is just how relationships are. No, they are not. This is how you have chose to condition yourself and repeat that pattern again and again, and then you blame circumstances outside by saying that you're just unlucky. The fact is, this is a pattern that you have consciously chose for yourself, which is now subconsciously running your life. And that pattern, when unexamined, becomes your destiny. But destiny in this case is not self-constructed. You do not rise above your relationship sort of blueprint, you live inside it. And this is why this distortion matters, because ego does not destroy dramatically. It guides you subtly towards what feels known, towards what feels validating, towards what reinforces the story you already believe about yourself. And unless you interrupt it, this repetition will continue and history will keep repeating itself. The ego repeats. The disciplined self selection repeated over years becomes fate. And if you do not interrupt this distortion early, it will not disappear from your life. It matures. Attraction patterns that begin in dating do not dissolve in marriage, they crystallize. And once crystallized, they are harder to break. And imagine someone who marries the emotionally distant partner. At first, the dynamic feels charged because it's a new relationship. There is chasing, there is longing, there is emotional tension. That early intensity feels meaningful. But over time, the tension becomes fatigue, distance becomes loneliness, conversations become careful, intimacy becomes inconsistent, and slowly something hardens. You begin to feel the invisible one in that relationship where you are unseen. But here is the uncomfortable layer. Part of you recognizes this dynamic. It feels familiar. It feels like something you have lived before. So instead of confronting the root, what you are doing, you are managing the symptoms on the surface. And this is why that treating of the symptoms and not treating the root cause of the problem means that you may have fixed things temporarily, but the underlying problem remains there. You may argue about tone, you may argue about time, you may argue about effort, but you do not confront the deep-seated pattern that you are familiar with. And what feels known feels survivable. Now imagine the alternative. You choose a partner who is emotionally available, who's consistent, who's clear, who's predictable. At first you feel unsettled, There is no chase, there's no guessing, there's no adventure because there's an absence of that emotional roller coaster. It feels quiet and boring, in fact. And in that quietness, something uncomfortable happens. You are left with yourself without drama to distract you, and without instability to manage, without intensity to interpret. And many people cannot tolerate that silence, so they create noise, movement, they pick up unnecessary fights. How many of us have experienced that when everything seems to be going good? One partner may test you by creating drama out of nothing, and you are scratching your head thinking, hang on, there's nothing here to argue about. Why have we why are we arguing? There seems to be no issue here whatsoever. But there is that deep-seated ego distortion which is looking for adventure, which is looking for noise, which then creates this argument. This is the unhealthy software that is running in that person's life, that which they may or may not have picked up. Then suddenly, when the unnecessary fights happen, they withdraw slightly, they test loyalty, they manufacture tension, not because they want destruction, it's because tension makes them feel alive. Peace feels foreign. The ego doesn't just repeat people, it repeats emotional climates. And unless you interrupt it, you will keep recreating the same atmosphere, just with different people, different settings. Just remember that. So let's confront another distortion. Some people are drawn to dominance, not because they like being diminished, but because dominance feels structured. If you grew up in an environment where authority was strong, even harsh, you may equate firmness with safety. When you meet someone who is assertive, controlling, decisive, you feel anchored. Even if that decisiveness slowly becomes suppression and control, you tell yourself, I like strong personalities, but what you may actually like is that familiarity. And familiarity is not always freedom. You don't choose what's healthy, you choose what your nervous system understands, and your nervous system understands whatever shaped it first from a long time. So let's examine the opposite distortion to that. Some people avoid stable love because stable love demands growth. If someone treats you consistently well, your insecurity has nowhere to hide. If someone communicates clearly, your avoidance becomes visible. If someone remains grounded during conflict, your volatility is exposed. So stable partners force you to confront yourself. There is no enemy to fight with. And that's why you create these enemies yourself. So the unstable partners distract you from yourself. That is why chaos can feel safer than calm. Chaos externalizes your sort of discomfort, whereas the calmness internalizes. An internal discomfort demands self-discipline. This is where you need to forge your character to begin that journey to become a stronger self, rather than allowing the ego to control you. You cannot build a strong self while repeatedly surrendering to familiar and the same repeated impulses. So you cannot build relationship stability while chasing activation and adventure. You cannot create peace if you're addicted to tension. So breaking this distortion requires something modern culture rarely talks about. What is that? It's restraint. Restraint against your own self, your own attraction. Restraint against immediate chemistry. Restraint against the rush of unpredictability, because attraction is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is a reflex action, and this is why people end up having affairs, one night stands, because they have that reflex action, that sudden attraction, impulsive attraction, which once you peeled away the layers, it does not make sense. It was not the cost, the consequential loss of that pursuit was not worth that adventure, that attraction. But at that moment in time, the ego desires that attraction, that impulsive action, because it wants an adventure. It's probably bored, as I've mentioned before. And that reflex action, if left unchecked, becomes part of your destiny. And this is what needs to be checked properly, because attraction is not destiny, selection is. And that selection, repeated over years and years, becomes your fate. Now, let's analyze this slowly. Picture yourself 10 years' time from now. You've repeated the same relational dynamics a few times, 2 times, 3 times, same intensity, same collapse, same confusion. At what point does that repetition stop being tragedy and you start being more selective in your choices? At what point do you stop and pause and think, hang on, if I'm constantly repeating the same mistakes, the same patterns, is this something that I am doing consciously and I can stop that? This is the moment where ego resists responsibility, because responsibility removes blame. Up until now, you kept protecting yourself and blaming others, the partners that you kept, relationships that you kept stumbling into, you kept blaming those partners. And that blame protects the self from growth. The ego says, I just have bad luck. The disciplined self says, there is a pattern here and I am participating in it and I am responsible for it. And it's that shift which can be extremely uncomfortable if you take responsibility and admit that you have a great part to play in this. It is actually empowering, because once you admit participation, you gain something, you gain control, you gain agency over it, and that agency demands discipline. You must train your nervous system to tolerate calm. You must train yourself to value consistency and stability over drama. You must train yourself to sit inside peace long enough for it to feel natural. That's why, and that's not weakness. If anything, it's strength. And this is why the couple who are able to adapt and live with each other's stability, be prepared to be bored with each other, be prepared to live with calmness and lack of adventure for some periods of time, are the ones who actually survive the test of time in that relationship and will understand that life itself doesn't always have to be one big adventure after another. Sometimes in life, in a relationship, you have to go through periods of calm where it seems like nothing is happening. This is why you need to adapt and change your mindset. This is actually empowering, and it is actually strength. The strength is the control over your impulses. Strength is walking away from what feels electrifying and unstable. Strength is choosing the person who builds you, not the person who momentarily activates you. So think about that for a moment. You may, as a woman, or as a husband even, let's say your spouse feels boring to you, just thinking that they don't bring you any activation. But somebody outside of your marriage you've seen, could be a work colleague, somebody that's known to you that you meet just momentarily outside of the house, feels like they enliven you, they activate you. This is about you controlling those impulses and being able to make a decision to choose stability over instability. That is true strength, in choosing the person who builds you, not the person who excites or activates you. And we know majority of the time the people who activate or excite you only do so for a very short, momentary amount of time. This is not about becoming cold, it is about becoming more deliberate in your choices. The ego chases what excites it. The disciplined self chooses what strengthens it. And those two paths lead to two very different destinations and futures. One leads to repetition and the other leads to growth. One feels dramatic, the other one feels grounded. And it's the grounded relationships that outlast the dramatic ones. Think about that. The ones who are stable, no drama, are the relationships that, if you truly respect and work on, are the ones that will outlast the ones which momentarily seem sort of full of adventure and passion. And it's that grounded relationship that over years or even decades becomes powerful for you and serves a true purpose for you. So the real question is not, why do I attract the wrong people? The real question is, am I strong enough to choose differently? Because once you understand that distortion, the responsibility shifts to you. You are not powerless in your attraction. You are just repeating a software pattern that which you have built, downloaded in your mind, into your heart, that you keep repeating without any question, without any restraint, again and again. But only if you are willing to endure and understand unfamiliar peace, only if you are willing to resist this impulsive desire for activation, only if you are willing to discipline your desire, the ego will repeat what is known to you. The disciplined self selects what builds strength. So choose carefully. The choice is in your hands, because what you repeatedly select will quietly shape your life, and over time that shaping will become your destiny. So just a final reminder, the choice is yours. If you're attracting the wrong people, then it's down to you, because you are repeating the same pattern, which is a software that you have downloaded from previous experiences, which has become a subconscious pattern that you are repeating automatically. So stop, think, ponder, and see how you can stop this repeated and endless cycle of ego distortion, which is ruining you and stealing your true peace.